Good evening, morning, or afternoon, aspiring business professionals. So glad you could make it for episode 2 of our journey together to figuring out how to dominate your career. My name is Brian Kessler, and I'm your host from the CPA Guide.com. In this episode, I want to fill you in on how my getting fired from my first job was the best thing that ever happened for my career. I also want to touch on the one tip I can give you that is going to lay the groundwork for everything you should base your career on, and the top 3 mistakes I made when I first started studying for the CPA exam. So are you ready? Here we go.
The CPA Guide.
The CPA Guide.com.
Let's learn how to dominate the CPA exam together. And here is your host and CPA Guide, Brian Kessler. Because if he can pass the CPA exam, anyone can.
So, am I crazy to say that getting fired from my first job was the best thing that ever happened to me? To most people I tell, it sounds very counterintuitive, and they give me kind of a weird face. Well, as you learned in episode 1, I got laid off in 2009 due to the economy and the fact that I had not passed the CPA exam yet. I was stuck in my $800 a month apartment, unemployed, and with 4 failed parts of the CPA exam under my belt, and only 120 days of savings left to survive on. I was so close to closing up shop and just moving back into my parents' basement to play World of Warcraft for a living. But thankfully, I decided to take a close look at my philosophy on work and even my work ethic, and figure out what I was doing wrong and how to fix my life to turn it around. For some reason, I had this image in my head before I graduated from college that everything would just kind of fall into place and that the real world would just kind of happen for me, and I'd get promoted and then get raises and so forth. And I'm sure most all of you have had the same experience of this, being a kid and then thinking that you will magically have all the answers once you've become an adult because, well, your parents just seem to have it all figured out, so why wouldn't it work for you the same way? So the first couple of days of my unemployment, I took stock of all my options based on the funds that I currently still had available in my bank account. I decided that my only option for success was to fully invest in my future. So as my first moment of clarity, I decided that I should write down 3 things that are most important to me so that I would be constantly reminded of why I was doing what I was doing and what I should really base my whole career on. So the 3 things I wrote down are as follows. The first is that I want to be a CPA to be able to provide for my future family. As I mentioned in episode 1, I had just started dating my future wife right as I had become unemployed. So this was a very important thing on my mind at the time, and believe me, I was truly embarrassed to have to explain how big of a failure I was as we were on our very first date. But thankfully, the fact that I was unemployed and hadn't passed the CPA exam, thankfully it didn't scare her away. My best guess is that it was either my Herculean muscles, or maybe it was the fact that she saw I was an extremely motivated individual with a plan for success. Not really sure which one it was. So the second item on my list of important things that I was willing to sacrifice to become a CPA was that I really want to become a CPA so that I can show my employers that I do not give up and that I'm willing to dedicate my life to completing a task no matter how impossible it feels. I knew that obtaining my CPA was going to separate me from the rest of the crowd, and believe me, I never wanted to be in the same situation I was at the regional firm I was at, where the firm had to pick between me and a peer, and the only thing they had to base it on was the fact that I wasn't a CPA yet. So after being involved in recruiting for a couple of years later in my career at the Big 4 firm, I now fully understand that passing the CPA exam or any other certification does not necessarily make you smarter than someone who has not passed. It just shows your employer that you are an extremely dedicated person with the will to succeed. The reason certifications are so difficult is that they do want to test your knowledge, but it is also a testament to your mental ability to stay focused and complete a complex task. An employer will look at your name and the letters after your name on your resume and already know that you have a strong work ethic, because you're more than likely the person hiring you went through the same suffering that you're currently going through to get those letters after their name. So they immediately know what you're capable of completing. So the final item on my list of 3 things that I ended up adding actually after I had obtained my second job was that I want to become a CPA so that I don't get stuck in a dead-end job and be bored out of my mind. As I mentioned in my first episode, after a month and a half of full-time job searching and passing 2 parts of the CPA exam, I landed a job at an entry-level accounting position in a commercial real estate company. The position did not require a CPA, and after about 6 months, I had already mastered just about everything there was to know in my job. And in order for me to move up in the company without a CPA, I was going to have to do the same job for over 5 to 7 years before I could even consider making manager. So this meant doing the same AP entries, same AR, and month-end financials over and over and over again every single month, until I've had enough experience that they'd trust me to promote me. So by the end of my 1.5 year tenure at the commercial real estate company, I was already pretty bored out of my mind with my work. So I knew that obtaining my CPA would open up all kinds of doors that would not previously have been available for me. So I used that as motivation to keep studying even while working full-time every week. So at this point, I want you to pause this podcast, take out a sheet of paper, and write down at least 3 things that are very important to you and that you are willing to temporarily sacrifice in order to become certified in your field so that you can improve your life and your career. So once you've figured out what you're willing to sacrifice to become certified, I want you to post them on your desk, on a Post-it note on your wall, somewhere where you're likely to be spending a lot of time studying. So I want these to be a constant reminder for you for why you're giving up your Friday nights and your weekends and spending valuable time with your friends and your family. So I also want to urge you to check out my show notes for this particular episode, and you can find them at thecpaguide.com/session002.html. And I urge you to share your top reasons in the comments section. I really want everyone to understand that we are all in this together and that we can use this community to help build each other up and keep each other motivated, because we're all in this together. All right, so back to my first couple days of being unemployed. I really hated getting laid off for no reason other than the economy and the fact that I didn't have my CPA. And it woke me up to the fact that success never comes easy. And that if I was going to be successful, that I was going to have to work harder than I've ever worked before. So in the first couple days of unemployment, I made the conscious decision that I was going to forget this preconceived notion that I would pass the CPA exam just like every other college test I took, and that I was actually going to devote my whole life to passing the CPA exam and getting a new job, even though I wasn't getting paid for it. So thankfully, the biggest asset that I had in my possession was the old CPA study materials that my firm had given me. So thankfully, they hadn't expired yet, but I no longer had a work computer, so I had to dip into my savings again to purchase a laptop. So I used my last paycheck to get a new one so that I could continue studying. So that was the first step to investing fully in myself. So day 3 of unemployment, I set out to completely rethink my CPA exam study plan. So this is the list of 3 things that I determined I was doing completely wrong when I first started studying for the CPA exam, and the reasons why I failed the first 4 sections that I took. So I determined that the reasons I had been failing the CPA exam were because I had been studying for each section the same way I'd been studying for tests in college. So it was very effective in college and allowed me to scrape by, but the absolute massive amount of information that is crammed into each section of the CPA exam makes my old method incredibly inefficient. So what were my original tactics? Well, I would read the text, watch the videos, highlight the key materials, and then, this is the crazy inefficient way to study that I can't believe I did, but I would physically make written outlines of the entire chapter and write down anything on top of that I thought was important. And then if I had time, I would make my own flashcards for any of these topics that I struggled to understand. Then after finishing all of these manual, time-intensive tasks, I would do as many multiple choice and simulations as possible. So you're probably sitting there right now shaking your head thinking how crazy I am. Well, it's funny how hindsight is always 20/20, but it's what worked for me in college, so I thought it would translate to the CPA exam. Well, the unemployed me decided to get rid of all that excess fat that I had originally been using in my study method, and I knew that I didn't have any excess time to mess around. And once I did this, the results were absolutely amazing. So I cut out watching lectures and highlighting because I found that I'm not an auditory learner, and it really didn't help me to learn the materials any quicker than if I had just dove into the text myself and taught myself. And please understand that if you are an auditory learner, then please use the lectures to learn, because they're definitely a valuable tool for you. They just didn't work for me. So I also stopped making the written outlines, and I just, to save a ton of time, bought the pre-printed flashcards, and this saved me countless hours of additional work that I really didn't need to be doing since somebody had already done it for me. So I also focused on learning why I got multiple choice questions wrong, and not just memorize the answers, which I had found myself inadvertently doing as I had done more and more multiple choice questions. So if you only have one review course, you're going to quickly start seeing duplicate multiple choice questions. So, in order to avoid memorizing just the answers, I really think that it's worth dipping into your precious savings to buy an online test bank from a separate review course. So that way you have a final review that you can use that will have fresh questions for you to answer from multiple choice questions that you've never seen before. So for me, I use Glime. So I highly recommend using them if you're unhappy with your current course or just need a test bank of thousands of multiple choice questions. So if you're interested, you can read my full review on my blog at thecpaguide.com/Glime, which is GLEIM.html. You can also check out Wiley CPA Excel's online test banks. I didn't personally use them to pass the CPA exam, but based on my experience going through a crash course of their review course and also feedback from other students, I do think that they are a great option to use as a final review as well. So I would recommend checking them out if Glime isn't a good fit for you. Okay, so moving on to my second mistake, which kind of piggybacks off of the first. So for me, in order to fit all of this extra work that I was making for myself, I was giving myself about 2 months to sit for each section. This is far too much time, in my opinion, looking back at it. So what I found was that the longer you study for the CPA exam, the more you're going to forget. The CPA exam really is the crammer's delight. When I first started studying, I would teach myself all the chapters sequentially, and then I never really got around to reviewing the old chapters as I progressed until I got to the last couple of weeks before the exam. Then I would just do this crash course of a final review that I mishmashed together, and it was a terrible habit. Just don't do this, and it cost me dearly. So if you learn anything from my mistakes, I really hope this one hits home from you. Please don't be lazy. Before bed every night, if possible, reread your notes or do all of the flashcards of the previous chapters, just so that material is always fresh in your mind. So just spend the extra 15 to 30 minutes in doing this, and it will absolutely change your world once you've gotten through all the materials, and then you look back at chapter 1 and then look at chapter 5, and you know all the information just like you learned it yesterday. So another thing is, give yourself no more than 4 to 6 weeks to study for each part. And this includes reg and FAR. I only gave myself 3 weeks to take FAR because it was all the time I had left before I started losing sections, and somehow it was my highest score. So I don't know if it's just a coincidence or if it was just the fact that I just crammed unlike I've ever crammed before, and it benefited me greatly. That's what I'd like to think it is, but and everything is different for everyone else. So just based on your own schedule, just schedule it with as much time as you can, but don't give yourself too much time. All right, so my final mistake was signing up for all 4 sections of the CPA exam at the same time, and the only reason I did this was to save a little bit of money. So not only did this end up wasting my money, but it cost me precious time as well, because I took the first section and failed it, and then I immediately had to move on to the second section because it was already scheduled. And of course, by the time I had taken the second one, I'd already forgotten most of the materials that I learned in the first section, and so forth. So repeat that 4 times. I've gone through the entire CPA exam, not passed a single one, and then I had to literally start over from scratch once I was unemployed. So for me, it didn't make sense, because I should have just stuck with one part until I passed it. So once I was unemployed, I smartened up a bit and just paid the extra few bucks and sign up for one part at a time, and then I was just decided I was going to study for that one section until I passed, and then move on to the next section. And this strategy worked out absolutely fantastic for me. So if you're brand new to the CPA exam process, I recommend signing up for 1, maybe 2 sections at a time, depending on how confident you are. All right, so in summary, the 3 biggest mistakes I made were: 1, using old study habits to study for the CPA exam. Please understand that any certification exam you take is going to be the most comprehensive exam